My ex-husband laughed during our divorce, and what the judge did was shocking. Barbara Johnson felt her hands tremble as she held the divorce papers. At 62, she never imagined she'd be there, in a Denver courtroom, asking to end a marriage that had lasted 38 years. That's when Richard, her ex-husband, started laughing, a loud, strange laugh that echoed through the crowded room. Judge Michael Thompson looked up from the documents, visibly annoyed by the man's disrespectful behavior. "Mr. Richard Wilson, can you explain why you're laughing in the middle of court?" the judge asked firmly. Richard wiped the tears streaming down his face, still smiling. "I'm sorry, Your Honor. It's just that I can finally tell the truth after all these years of keeping this secret." Barbara's heart raced. What secret? What was he talking about? The others in the room also seemed confused. "Barbara always thought I married her for money," Richard continued. "But the truth is, I always knew about the inheritance she hid from me our entire marriage." Barbara's world crumbled in that moment. How could he know? She had guarded that secret so carefully for decades. The $1 million inheritance her mother left her was in an account Richard never knew existed. Judge Thompson banged his gavel. "I'm adjourning this hearing. I want to speak with both of you in my chambers. Now." In the courthouse halls, Barbara walked as if in a trance. Richard walked beside her, still smiling, though more softly now. She couldn't bring herself to look at him. In the judge's chambers, the dark, wood-paneled walls seemed to close in around Barbara. Judge Thompson motioned to 2 chairs in front of his desk. "Now I want to understand this better," the judge said. "Mr. Richard, how did you find out about this inheritance?" Richard took a deep breath before answering. "Your Honor, I found out by accident 3 months after we married. Barbara got a letter from the bank and left it open on the table. I read it without meaning to, and saw the account statement." "And why didn't you ever say anything?" Barbara asked, her voice choked. "Because I truly loved you, Barbara. I saw you were afraid I'd married you for money, so I pretended not to know so you'd feel safe." Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, take a moment to like and subscribe to the channel. It really helps us as we're just starting out. Now, back to the story. Judge Thompson watched the exchange with growing interest. In 40 years on the bench, he'd never seen anything like it. "Mr. Richard, are you saying that for 38 years you pretended not to know about this money?" "Exactly. I worked like crazy to support our home, took overtime, sometimes 2 jobs, all so Barbara would never feel pressured to use that money." Barbara began to cry. Tears of regret streamed down her face as she remembered all the times Richard came home exhausted from work. All the opportunities he'd turned down, all the sacrifices he'd made. "You suffered because of me," she whispered. "No, Barbara. I chose to protect you. I chose to love you the way you needed to be loved." The judge stood and walked to the window. Outside, life went on as usual on Broadway, but inside that office, a love story was being painfully revealed. "Is there anything else you need to tell me?" Judge Thompson asked. Barbara swallowed hard. It was time to tell the truth. "I asked for the divorce because I found out Richard is sick, cancer, and I didn't want him to think I'd stay out of pity or spend my inheritance on his treatment." Richard turned to her, stunned. "How did you know?" "I never told anyone. I saw the test results in your car. That's why I decided to separate, so you wouldn't feel like a burden to me." Judge Michael Thompson returned to his chair, clearly moved by what he was hearing. "Let me understand this. You filed for divorce to protect your husband, and you agreed to it to protect your wife." Both nodded silently. "And all these years, each of you kept secrets to protect the other." Again, they confirmed. The judge fell silent for a few moments, collecting his thoughts. On his desk was a photo of his late wife, to whom he had been married for 45 years before she passed due to a heart condition. "I'm going to make an unprecedented decision," he finally said. "I'm suspending this divorce proceeding and referring you to family mediation. I can't allow 2 people who love each other so deeply to separate over misunderstandings." Barbara and Richard looked at each other for the first time since entering the office. "Judge, but can you do that?" Richard asked. "I can and I will. In exceptional cases, I have the authority to suspend proceedings when reconciliation is possible, and this is the most exceptional case I've ever seen. 3 weeks later, Barbara and Richard were in the office of court psychologist Dr. Jennifer Roberts. The mediation sessions had revealed even deeper layers of mutual sacrifice. "Richard, would you like to tell Barbara about the letters?" the therapist suggested. He opened a shoebox he had brought with him. Inside were dozens of handwritten letters. "All these years, I wrote letters to you, Barbara. Letters I never sent. I wrote about my fears, my dreams, about how much I loved you, even knowing your secret." Barbara picked up one of the letters with trembling hands and began to read. "My dearest Barbara, today you seemed worried when I came home from work. I wanted to tell you I knew about your mother's money, but I also wanted to say it never changed anything. I love you for the brave woman you are, the devoted mother you were to our children, the generous heart you have. Money is just paper, my love. Paper. You are real." The letter was dated 15 years earlier. "I wrote letters too," Barbara confessed, pulling a stack of envelopes from her purse. "Letters to you, about my guilt for hiding the inheritance, about how awful I felt watching you work so hard." Richard took one of hers. "My love, today I saw you asleep on the couch after another double shift. I wanted to tell you about Mom's money, but I'm so afraid you'd change toward me. I'd rather see you tired but genuine than comfortable but different. Forgive my cowardice." Dr. Jennifer watched as the couple exchanged letters, reading in silence, tears streaming down both their faces. "Do you realize you've spent 38 years loving and protecting each other, but never truly communicating?" Barbara nodded, still reading a letter where Richard mentioned turning down a promotion that would have required them to move to Chicago just because he knew she loved Denver. "Richard, you turned down that Ennicourt promotion because of me. Yes, you always talked about how much you loved being near your sister Margaret. I didn't want to take you away from here. But that promotion could have changed our whole lives. You could have been regional manager. So what? My life was already perfect with you by my side." The session was interrupted by a knock at the door. The secretary entered with a strange expression. "Dr. Roberts, there's a woman here who says she's Barbara's sister and needs to speak urgently about the divorce case." Margaret walked in, clutching a folder of documents, her face flushed with nerves. "Barbara, I need to tell you something I should have said long ago." "What is it, Margaret?" "It's about Richard. 15 years ago, I made a terrible proposal to him." The atmosphere in the room grew tense. Richard turned pale, and Barbara gripped the arm of her chair tightly. "What kind of proposal?" asked Dr. Jennifer Roberts. Margaret took a deep breath before continuing. "I offered Richard money to leave you, a lot of money. I was jealous of your marriage, of how much he loved you. My marriage was falling apart, and I couldn't stand seeing your happiness." Barbara stood up from her chair, stunned. "You did what?" "I offered $500,000 for him to abandon you and leave town. I said you deserved someone better, that he was just a laborer with no future." Richard, who had stayed silent until then, finally spoke. "I remember that day well, Margaret. You came to the factory where I worked and made that disgusting offer." "And what did you say?" asked Barbara, her voice barely audible. "I told your sister she was crazy if she thought any amount of money in the world would make me abandon the woman I loved, and that if she ever came to me again with those ideas, I'd tell you everything." Margaret lowered her head in shame. "That's why I never tried again. But I also never had the courage to tell the truth. Seeing you two divorcing now, I couldn't stay silent any longer." Dr. Jennifer made a few notes and then looked at the couple. "Barbara, how do you feel knowing this?" "Devastated. Richard passed the hardest test anyone could face, and I didn't even know. Meanwhile, I doubted his love over money he didn't even care about." Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, take a moment to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It helps us a lot as we're just starting out. Now continuing. Margaret opened the folder she had brought with her. "There's more, Barbara. I found these old receipts at Mom's house when I was cleaning the attic." She spread the papers across the table. There were dozens of payment slips, all signed by Richard Wilson Brown. "What are these papers?" asked Barbara. Richard paid for Dad's treatment when he had the stroke, paid without you knowing. And he also covered Mom's physical therapy when she broke her hip. It was $3,000 a month for 2 years. Barbara picked up the receipts with trembling hands. She saw her husband's signature on each one, always with the note, "Confidential payment at patient's request." "How did you get this money, Richard? We barely had enough for our own bills." "I sold lunches at the factory during breaks, made meals at home in the early morning and sold them to my co-workers. The extra money I saved for family emergencies." "You woke up at 4 in the morning to cook?" 3:30. "Had to prepare everything before leaving for work." Barbara began to sob. Every morning she woke up to find Richard already dressed. She thought he was just an early riser. She never imagined he was working while she slept. "Your parents asked me not to tell you," Richard explained. "They didn't want you to feel obligated to use your mother's inheritance for their treatments. So everyone knew about the money except me." "No, Barbara," said Margaret. "Your parents knew you had savings, but they didn't know Richard also knew. They just asked him not to mention the payments to you." The situation grew even more complex when Dr. Jennifer asked a direct question. "Richard, explain more about your illness. What kind of cancer do you have?" "Prostate. Found out 6 months ago. The doctor said it's treatable, but the treatment is expensive and lengthy." "Why didn't you tell Barbara?" "For the same reason she hid the inheritance. I didn't want her to feel obligated to stay with me or spend money out of pity." Barbara stood up and walked to the window. Outside, she saw people walking along Constitution Avenue, each with their own lives and problems. She felt foolish for complicating a situation that could have been so simple. "Doctor." "Roberts, can I ask you something?" said Barbara without turning around. "Of course. Is it possible to cancel a divorce request? If both parties agree, yes." Barbara turned to Richard, who watched her with hope in his eyes. "Would you be willing to try again, this time with no secrets?" "I never wanted to separate, Barbara. I only accepted because I thought that's what you wanted." Dr. Roberts smiled, witnessing a moment she rarely saw in her office. "I'll prepare the paperwork to cancel the process, but first I want you both to make a pact here in front of me." "What kind of pact?" asked Richard. "Total transparency. No matter how hard the truth is, you promise to share everything with each other from now on." Barbara and Richard stood up and held hands in the middle of the room. "I promise never to hide anything from you again," said Barbara. "And I promise to accept your help and share my fears with you," replied Richard. Margaret, who had remained silent while watching the reconciliation, approached the couple. "Can I ask for your forgiveness?" Barbara looked at her sister and then at Richard. "Margaret, you almost destroyed my marriage out of jealousy, but you were also the one who brought proof that my husband has always been the honest man I should have recognized. Can you forgive me?" "I can, but it'll take time to trust you again." Richard, in turn, extended his hand to Margaret. "Thank you for coming here today. If you hadn't had the courage to tell the truth, Barbara and I might never have realized how much we truly love each other." 2 weeks later, Barbara and Richard were in the office of Dr. William Carter, an oncologist at Riverside Medical Center. Barbara had insisted on accompanying Richard to all his appointments from then on. "Mr. Wilson, with proper treatment, your chances of recovery are 95%. It's early-stage cancer and very responsive to medication." "Doctor, what's the total cost of treatment?" asked Barbara, holding her husband's hand. "Approximately $200,000, including surgery, chemotherapy, and follow-up." Barbara smiled for the first time in months. "Doctor, you can start treatment immediately. We can afford it." On the way home, Richard drove while Barbara looked out the window. They were passing by Central Park, where they had met 42 years ago at a 4th of July party. "Richard, can I ask you something? Now you can ask me anything you want. Did you ever get mad at me for hiding the inheritance?" "Never. I was sad sometimes, thinking about what we could have done together if you had trusted me. But mad? Never." "What would you have wanted to do?" "Travel with you. See other places in the United States. Maybe even pursue that mechanical engineering specialization I always dreamed of. But mostly I would have loved to see you more relaxed, without the burden of hiding something." Barbara felt a pang in her chest. How many opportunities had they lost because of her fear? And now, what would you like to do? "First, get better. Then, if you're willing, we could fulfill some of the dreams we postponed. I'd do anything with you." At home in their small 3-bedroom house in the Riverside neighborhood, Barbara went to the closet and pulled out a box hidden deep behind the winter coats. "Richard, come here." He found his wife sitting on the bed with the open box beside her. "What's this?" "Bank statements from the last 38 years. Every month I printed the balance of the inheritance account and kept it here." Richard picked up some of the papers. The initial amount was $1 million, but over the years it had decreased significantly. "Barbara, where's half the money?" "I donated it to charities, always anonymously. I thought if I wasn't going to use the money for us, at least it could help others." "You donated $500,000 without telling me." "Yes, to Children's Memorial Hospital, nursing homes, to the ARC, always afraid you'd find out and think I was wasting our security." Richard sat on the bed beside his wife. "Barbara, do you know what this means? That I'm irresponsible? No. It means you have the most generous heart in the world, and that I married the right woman." Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, please take a moment to like and subscribe to the channel. It helps us a lot as we're just starting out. Now, back to the story. They decided to use the remaining $500,000 wisely. $200,000 for Richard's treatment, $100,000 to renovate the house, $50,000 for a trip across the United States they'd always dreamed of, and the rest would be saved for future emergencies. But fate had more surprises in store for the couple. During Richard's first chemotherapy session at Riverside Medical Center, Barbara was in the waiting room when she was approached by an elegant woman around 70 years old. "Excuse me, are you Barbara Johnson?" "Yes, that's me. Can I help you?" "My name is Eleanor Williams. I'm the president of the Hope Foundation. 15 years ago, we received a very generous anonymous donation from someone who signed only as BJ. I've always wanted to meet our benefactor." Barbara was speechless. How had this woman discovered her identity? "How did you know it was me?" "Your sister Margaret reached out to us recently. She said you were going through a tough time, and that maybe it was time we met the person who helped us so much in person." Eleanor sat beside Barbara in the waiting room. "Mrs. Johnson, your donation allowed us to build an entire wing of our rehabilitation center. Over 1,000 children have benefited over the years. You don't have to thank me. I just did what I thought was right. But we want to do more than thank you. We want to honor you. Next month, we're inaugurating the Foundation's new library, and we'd like to name it after you." Barbara began to cry, overwhelmed. "Eleanor, I don't deserve this." "Of course you do. And there's one more thing. We found out your husband helped us indirectly too." "How so?" "Richard Wilson Brown, isn't it? He organized several fundraising campaigns at the factory where he worked, always in our foundation's name. He raised over $50,000 over the years." Barbara was stunned. Another surprise about the man she'd been married to for nearly 4 decades. "He never told me." He asked for confidentiality, said he didn't want to seem like he was showing off. When Richard came out from his chemotherapy session, he found Barbara chatting animatedly with Eleanor. When he saw the woman, his face turned red. "Mrs. Williams, what are you doing here? Finally meeting my mysterious donor and taking the chance to thank you in person for the campaigns at the factory." "Barbara, I can explain." "You don't need to explain anything, my love. I just want to know how many other good things you've done without telling me." Eleanor stood to leave, but first handed Barbara an envelope. "What's this?" "Invitations to the library inauguration that will bear your name, and a little surprise we prepared for both of you." 3 weeks later, Barbara and Richard were in the grand hall of the Hope Foundation, surrounded by over 200 people. On stage, Eleanor gave the inauguration speech for the Barbara Johnson Library. "This library exists because a generous woman decided her inheritance could do more than secure her personal comfort. She decided it could change lives." The audience applauded as Barbara wiped away her tears. Richard held her hand, proud of the woman he had chosen to share his life with. "But the generosity doesn't stop there," continued Eleanor. "The husband of this extraordinary woman has also decided to dedicate part of his time and energy to help our cause, organizing campaigns and involving co-workers in our mission." Eleanor paused dramatically before continuing. "That's why we decided it wouldn't be fair to honor only Barbara. Starting today, our new library will be named the Barbara and Richard Johnson Library. The couple looked at each other, surprised and moved. They had never imagined their quiet actions would one day be publicly recognized. "And now one last surprise," said Eleanor. "We know the couple is facing health challenges, so our foundation, in partnership with Riverside Medical Center, has decided to create a scholarship for oncology research. The funds for this scholarship were donated by business owners who learned about your story through the press." Barbara and Richard exchanged glances, confused. "What story in the press?" Richard asked. Eleanor smiled. "Judge Michael Thompson shared your story, without identifying you, of course, during a lecture on family mediation at the Colorado State Court of Appeals. A journalist in attendance was so moved that he wrote an article about second chances in love. The article went viral online and reached some of the city's business owners. And what was their reaction?" Barbara asked. "They decided to help a couple who, according to the article, proved that true love overcomes any misunderstanding. They raised $300,000 to fully cover your treatment, Richard." The couple was in shock. In just a few months, their lives had completely transformed, from an impending divorce to a renewal of love, and now a support network of people they didn't even know. After the ceremony, as they drove home, Richard stopped the car in Central Park, the same spot where they had met decades earlier. "Why are we stopping here?" "I want to renew our vows, Barbara. Right here, where it all began." "Now?" "Now. No judge, no witnesses, no party. Just you and me." They got out of the car and walked to the gazebo where the 1982 4th of July celebration had taken place. The night was clear and a few stars were visible in the Denver sky. "Barbara Johnson," Richard said, taking his wife's hands, "I promise to love you with complete transparency. I promise to share my fears and dreams with you. I promise to trust you the way you deserve. And I promise we'll grow old together, with no more secrets." "Richard Wilson Brown," Barbara replied, "I promise to trust in your unconditional love. I promise not to let fear guide our decisions anymore. I promise to stand by you in sickness and in health, and I promise we'll use the time we have left to be truly happy." They kissed under the moonlight, sealing a new chapter of their lives. 6 months later, Richard was cancer-free. The treatment had been a complete success, and the doctors gave him a full discharge. To celebrate, the couple decided to take the trip across the United States they had always dreamed of. They visited Niagara Falls, explored Key West, walked the historic streets of Savannah, and were moved by the Grand Canyon. In every place, they photographed moments that seemed to make up for years of excessive caution. In Malibu, California, as they watched the sunset from the dunes, Barbara made a confession. "Richard, do you know what the biggest mistake of my life was?" "What?" "Not trusting you from the beginning. We lost so many years living in fear." "We didn't lose them, Barbara. We lived the best way we could at the time. What matters is that now we know how to love without masks." "You're not angry with me?" "Angry? I'm proud. You're the bravest woman I know. She raised our children, helped hundreds of people through her donations, and still had the strength to start over with me at 62. Back in Denver, they were in for a surprise. Their children, Daniel and Emily, had prepared a second honeymoon party for their parents. The whole family was gathered at the Riverside neighborhood home, including their 4 grandchildren. "Dad, Mom," said Daniel, "you've given us the greatest lesson in love we could ever have. Our children will grow up knowing that true love overcomes any obstacle." Emily, who was a nurse and had closely followed her father's treatment, approached her parents with teary eyes. "You know you almost lost us, right? When we heard about the divorce, we were devastated. But now we understand you needed to go through that to truly find each other again." During the party, Barbara received an unexpected call. It was Judge Michael Thompson. "Mrs. Johnson, I hope I'm not bothering you. I called with some news." "What news, Judge?" "Based on your case, the Colorado State Court of Appeals has decided to create a pilot program for mandatory family mediation before any divorce proceedings. We don't want cases like yours to get lost in misunderstandings." "That's wonderful, Judge. And there's more. We'd like you both to be the first volunteer mediators for the program. You'd help other couples find their way back to each other." Barbara looked at Richard, who nodded in agreement. judge, it would be an honor. A year later, Barbara and Richard had helped 15 couples save their marriages through the mediation program. Their own experiences became valuable tools to identify when love still existed beneath layers of pride and miscommunication. On a winter afternoon, they were in Dr. Jennifer Roberts' office, who now coordinated the program when a very special couple arrived. Mrs. Dorothy, 68, and Mr. George, 72, had been married for 50 years and also wanted a divorce due to misunderstandings about money and trust. "You remind us so much of ourselves," Barbara told the older couple. "How so?" asked Mrs. Dorothy. "You spent your whole lives protecting yourselves from each other, when you should have been protecting each other," Richard explained. Through long, honest conversations, Barbara and Richard helped Mrs. Dorothy and Mr. George realize their secrets were actually misunderstood gestures of love. "You know what I learned from you?" Mr. George said at the end of the session, "that you can be married for 50 years and still have so much to discover about the person you love." That comment made Barbara reflect on her own journey. At 63, she felt she was living the best phase of her marriage. The transparency they had achieved brought an intimacy they never imagined possible. At home that night, as they prepared dinner together, a routine they'd adopted since reconciling, Richard shared some news. "Barbara, the folks at the factory want to honor me before my retirement." "What kind of honor?" "They want to name the fundraising program I coordinated after me. It'll be called the Richard Wilson Solidarity Program." "You deserve it, my love. How many families have you helped over the years?" "I don't know, I never counted, but I think I want to do something different in retirement." "What do you have in mind?" "How about we open our home to couples going through hard times? We could share our experience in a more personal way." Barbara stopped chopping vegetables and looked at her husband. "You want to turn our house into a kind of support center?" "Why not? We have the space, the time, and most importantly, we have a story that could inspire others." The idea took root quickly. They renovated the basement, creating a cozy room where they could host couples in crisis. They named the project New Beginnings House. In the first month, they helped 3 couples. By the second month, 5. By the third, demand was so high they had to create a waiting list. The story of Barbara and Richard spread by word of mouth across the city. The couple who nearly divorced because they loved each other too much had become a model for healthy relationships. In one of their most memorable sessions, they met with a young couple, Jessica and Tyler, both 28, who were separating because she had discovered he hid a credit card debt. "Do you think we can get past this?" Jessica asked. "It depends," Barbara replied. "Do you love each other?" "Very much," they answered in unison. "Then love isn't the problem," Richard said. "The problem is communication." "Tyler, why did you hide the debt?" "Because I was ashamed. I wanted to handle it alone so I wouldn't disappoint Jessica." "And you, Jessica, how did you react when you found out?" "I was furious. Not about the debt, but the lie." Barbara and Richard exchanged a glance, recognizing familiar patterns. "Do you realize you're making the exact same mistake we did?" Barbara said. "What do you mean?" "Tyler, you hid the debt to protect Jessica, just like Richard hid that he knew about my inheritance to protect me. And Jessica, you reacted with distrust because you felt betrayed, just like I did when I found out Richard knew my secret." The parallel made the young couple reflect. By the end of the session, Tyler confessed the full extent of the debt, and Jessica committed to helping him pay it off, even if it meant delaying their wedding plans. "We'd rather get married in debt but honest than rich and dishonest," Jessica said. 3 months later, Jessica and Tyler sent a wedding invitation to Barbara and Richard with a special note. "To the couple who taught us love grows when we share our fears." New Beginnings House was so successful that the Denver City Council decided to create an official program based on Barbara and Richard's model. They would oversee a network of similar houses across the city. "Can you believe it?" Barbara said to Richard one Sunday morning as they sipped tea in the backyard. 2 years ago, we were in court filing for divorce, and now we're relationship experts." "Life has its ironies, doesn't it?" Our biggest mistake became our greatest strength. You know what I love most about all this? What? That we're finally truly living together. No secrets, no fears, no assumptions. Just love. Richard stood and held out his hand. Come here. Where? Let's dance. Here in the yard. There's no music. We'll make our own. They danced barefoot on the grass, laughing like teenagers. Neighbors watching from their windows smiled, knowing the story of the couple who nearly split up and now lived like newlyweds. As they danced, Barbara whispered in her husband's ear, "Thank you for laughing that day in court." Why? Because your laughter was the start of our real love story. You know why I laughed that day? Why? Because I could finally tell the truth, and the truth freed me to love you without holding back. 2 years after their near divorce, Barbara and Richard received a call that would change their lives again. It was Eleanor from the Hope Foundation. "Barbara, we have an amazing opportunity for you." "What is it, Eleanor?" "The National Broadcasting Network heard your story and wants to make a documentary about New Beginnings House. They say it's a story that could inspire the entire United States." Barbara was speechless. She never imagined their personal story could have a national impact. "But Eleanor, our story is so simple. Oh, we're just ordinary people who made ordinary mistakes." That's exactly why it's inspiring. It shows that any couple can start over if both parties are willing. The documentary aired on a Sunday night and had an unexpected impact. The phone at New Beginnings House wouldn't stop ringing, with requests for help coming from all over the country. Barbara and Richard decided to write a book telling their story and the lessons they learned from the couples they helped. The book was called The Laughter That Saved Our Love and became a national bestseller. With the book's success, they began traveling across the United States, giving talks about relationships. In every city, they met couples with stories similar to theirs. True love suffocated by pride and lack of communication. In Miami, they met Clarence and Betty, married for 45 years, who were separating because she discovered he had hidden the fact that he knew how to read and write. He pretended to be illiterate out of shame for having learned late in life. In New Orleans, they helped Walter and Ruth, who almost divorced because she hid her fluency in English. She was afraid he'd feel inferior for not having studied. "Do you notice a pattern?" Richard asked Barbara during one of their trips. "Yes, people sabotage themselves out of love. They hide their strengths to avoid hurting their partner and end up building relationships based on well-intentioned lies." Exactly. We're not unique. We're an example of something very common that's rarely discussed. 5 years after their reconciliation, New Beginnings House had already helped over 1,000 couples. The success rate was impressive. 78% of couples managed to overcome their crises and renew their relationships. Barbara, now 67, felt she had found her true calling. Richard, retired and fully recovered from cancer, divided his time between the support house and a personal project, setting up a community auto shop where he taught underprivileged youth a trade. "You know what I'm most proud of in all this," Barbara said during one of her talks in San Diego. "What, Mum?" asked Emily, who had started joining her parents at events. "That we turned our pain into purpose. Our near separation became fuel to help others." The audience applauded, moved by her words. "And do you know the biggest secret to a lasting relationship?" Barbara continued. "What?" someone shouted from the crowd. "It's not love. You already have love. It's courage. Courage to be vulnerable, to admit fears, to ask for help when you need it." Richard, sitting in the front row, stood and walked to the stage. "Can I add something?" he asked, taking the microphone. "Of course, my love. It's also important to know how to laugh at yourself. That day in court when I laughed at the situation, I wasn't mocking Barbara. I was laughing out of relief that I could finally be authentic." "And today?" a woman in the audience asked. "Do you still argue?" Barbara and Richard laughed together. "Of course we argue," Barbara replied, "but now we argue constructively. We don't hold grudges, we don't make assumptions, and we always resolve everything the same day. And we never hide anything from each other anymore," Richard added, "no matter how small." After the talk, a young couple approached the stage. "Could you give us some quick advice?" the young woman asked. "Of course," Barbara said. We've been dating for 3 years and want to get married, but he wants to wait until we're more financially stable and I want to marry soon. How do we resolve this?" Richard and Barbara exchanged a glance and smiled. "Talk," Richard said. "Sit down and really talk. Understand each other's fears. He's probably afraid he won't be able to give you the life you deserve, and you're probably afraid he's making excuses." "And then?" the young man asked. "Then decide together," Barbara replied. "There's no right or wrong decision. Only decisions made together or decisions forced upon you. The first ones strengthen the relationship, the second ones destroy it." 6 months later, the couple sent a wedding invitation to Barbara and Richard with a note, "We've decided to marry now and build our financial life together. Thank you for teaching us that love doesn't wait for perfect conditions." End of story. And you, what did you think of this story of perseverance and true love? Share in the comments how you would react if you were in Barbara or Richard's place. Could you forgive decades of well-intentioned secrets? And most importantly, don't forget to leave your like on this video and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss other heartwarming stories like this one.